Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for attending the annual WriteHive conference. This year we've got so much information jam-packed into these sessions that's here for writers, writing professionals, and of course any member of the publishing industry. If you're not familiar with WriteHive, WriteHive is a nonprofit organization serving the writing community with resources, events, programming, connections, and so much more. Our 2022 conference brings you this wonderful session, Decolonizing Tropes, where we will discuss some great information about how it is we can, what the topic means and what it is we can do to help writers decolonize tropes as we continue. If this is the type of information you like listening to and you want more content along this line, you can always visit the WriteHive 2021 panels, writehive.org, and look for the anti-colonial world building or Decolonize Your Craft, Rethinking Fantasy Races panels. Those are absolutely wonderful resources to get your mindset on how it is we can decolonize tropes. We've got 4 amazing panelists today, and I'm gonna go ahead and let them introduce themselves. And first person up, RJ, on my screen, so let's take it away.
Okay, hi everybody. So I am RJ Joseph, aka Rhonda Jackson Garcia, and I am an academic and creative writer, focusing mostly on the intersections of race and gender in the horror genre, in the romance genre, and pop culture in general. And I'm really glad to be here.
Awesome, thank you so much, RJ. Keir?
Hello, everyone. I'm Keir Alekseii. This is my first time at WriteHive, but my 4th panel. Wow, now that I've said that, that sounds like so many. I am an associate agent at Azantean Literary Agency, which is based in California, and I am currently open to queries, things that are fun to know about me. I love cats, so if you see tails wagging across the screen, that's all that is. Don't be alarmed. There may be some interesting background noise still, don't be alarmed. I am very dedicated to finding and representing diverse voices. I'm only open to queries from marginalized or underrepresented writers because that is what I'm passionate about. I became an agent to create a more diverse publishing industry on this side of the planet. And hopefully the rest of it too, but I gotta start somewhere, so thank you.
Perfect. Adiba?
Hi, I'm Adiba Jaigirdar. I am an author, a young adult author, and a former teacher. I wrote The Henna Wars, Honey and Issues, Guide to Fake Dating, and also my upcoming historical, which is called A Million to One. I mostly write books about queer brown girls who get to have their happily ever after.
Nice, thank you so much. Welcome. Lauren?
Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren T. Davila. I am a Latina writer, author, and anthologist. I'm currently pursuing my PhD in English at Claremont Grad University in Claremont, or in California, sorry. My short fiction and poetry have appeared online in multiple formats, and I also have multiple anthologies that I've edited, including a BIPOC Gothic anthology that released back in May when other people saw us to Sell the Dead, and I have over, I think, 4 upcoming in the next year or 2, so be able to look out for those. I am also an acquisitions editor at Capstone Books currently, and the editor-in-chief at Foothill Poetry Journal. So a lot of different hats like everybody else here.
That's got it. I'm so interested to hear your perspectives, especially when you see it from the multiple views from creator and like marketers and agents, so editors. Awesome. Well, the very first question that I have for everybody is, what does it mean to decolonize tropes? So Lauren, I'm going to start with you because I see you first here. So
Sure. So for me, and this is sort of like interesting because I hadn't necessarily thought too much about decolonizing tropes, like putting those two together. And so this panel's been really interesting for me to approach. But I think for me, it's looking a lot beyond just white-centric examples of tropes. Like a lot of people throw around, oh, this book just hits this trope, or this movie's just filled with all these tropes. And, we have a lot of, love interest, especially in different genres. Romance genre, I know for sure that has a lot of sort of whiteified tropes, I like to say. And And so I think assessing how colonization and white-centric spaces play into certain tropes, really for me, and moving beyond that. I know we'll be talking a lot about this, so I have more to say on it, but just pushing beyond some white-centric tropes.
Awesome. RJ?
Yeah, so just to piggyback off what Lauren said, is basically to allow different perspectives in telling the stories. We have to shift the lens of power in order to get authentic stories that are truly diverse and inclusive. So in order to do that, we have to decolonize that point of center, which means that we have to center other perspectives other than the dominant societies.
Nice. Adiba?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's already done such a good job explaining what decolonizing tropes is. But I guess, the important thing is to look at what decolonization itself is, which is, like Rhonda said, it's about like decentering whiteness and centering a different perspective. So I think when it comes to tropes, we need to really be able to break all of them down and look at what has actually been making these tropes work and how have they centered whiteness and how have they centered Western centricism. And then we need to, almost look at them from the inside out in order to be able to center ourselves.
Keir?
Absolutely, I agree. To take that just, I guess, one step further, I know that because we're talking about decolonization, specifically race is at the forefront of our minds because we all, I think, have experience with what white colonialism looks like. But I do think that has influenced more than just the tropes that are related to racial and cultural backgrounds, but we also have tropes that are ableist and tropes that are, what's the word for language? Linguist? No, that's not the word.
Linguistic?
Tropes that, yeah, like we have tropes that go. Thank you. I'm so glad somebody came to my rescue. But there are tropes that go beyond that. They're still informed by the process of colonization that we experienced. And I think so. It's not just about decentralizing whiteness and removing that lens, but it's also about considering what are the other dominant lenses that we are using to look at other tropes. Because tropes are about expectation, right? And I love talking about the difference between stereotypes and tropes and archetypes. One of my favorite things to chat about. But because tropes are a key tool in the writer's toolbox, they live and they breathe expectations. And so I think it's not just about removing the lens, the white lens of those expectations, but also all of the things that also informed that white lens informed, not just with race, but with all of the other aspects of diversity out there that have been influenced by colonization and trying to decolonize those.
Great. Our next question is, how should writers rethink tropes? Okay. So how should writers rethink when they're planning and writing? What do we do to rethink tropes? Adiba?
So I like to think about tropes in terms of what I am in conversation with when I'm writing a trope. And I think when we're trying to decolonize tropes, that's really important because as Keir said about expectations, we do need to think about what are the expectations that a reader is going into when they're picking up a book or a piece of writing, and it is addressing a certain trope or using a certain trope. So I think being aware of how this trope has historically been used is really, really important. So once you kind of see different examples of its uses, and you can kind of see the ways that maybe it has perpetuated harm, or even the ways that it has been used in a really positive way. Once you see both sides of that, you see where you can sit in conversation with the ways in which the trope has been used, and then you can actively use it in your writing in a way that is decolonized.
RJ?
Yeah, so it's really important as Keir and Adiba have said, to understand what the tropes are, right? So for horror, we have to know that some of those tropes are monsters. The monsters have been traditionally set up in certain ways, but once we understand that as a foundation, we're then able to take those tropes and then start to break down what they would actually look like through the lens of something different from a different group or a different centralized power, right? So for instance, a vampire, at the time that these creatures first came about in literature and became really popular, this was like the Victorian ages. And so the horrors and things that were terrifying were seen through the eyes of white men. And the vampire represented a loss of control or a loss of that power. But in the hands of a marginalized writer, marginalized people are typically already devoid of power, right? And so the vampire may not represent that. The vampire might actually represent a way to gain power or a way to make things different. And so you have to kind of know that background, to know that history, to understand how you can use the tropes in a decentered kind of a way and offer something fresh other than what's already been done.
Nice. Okay. Lauren?
Yeah, I think sort of piggybacking off of what Adiba and RJ already have said, but I think being cognizant of how you're personally writing tropes if you're on the creative side, or how you're interpreting tropes if you're sort of on the audience side. And I think just being aware of, as Adiba said, like historically how tropes have been used is like a great baseline to establish, because you want to be an active participant when you're reading a book, right? We want to come to it in a space where we like sort of understand what's going on. And so I think oftentimes like a lot of tropes are used in genre fiction, I think, as well as some certain specific genres or age groups. And so one of the ones that I was thinking of, and I brought sort of as an example, is like the found family trope. Like I know that that's utilized like a lot. But is that found family, for example, like maybe a group of wealthier white people or a white family who is, taking in somebody from a historically marginalized community? Like, how does that trope have some different layers that maybe a white audience wouldn't see that maybe a BIPOC audience would? Or, and I feel like we can come up with so many examples, and I'm sure we'll talk about some other ones, but I think just being aware of the power imbalances through some of these tropes is a great way to approach it.
Keir?
Absolutely. Actually, to jump off exactly what Lauren just said about the power dynamic in those tropes and how you play with that, something that I would encourage writers to ask themselves when they're trying to rethink these tropes is, what is the current narrative about, like, what is the controlling lens or the controlling power dynamic in the trope that you're about to experiment with? How can you destroy or destabilize that? How can you change that narrative? How can you change that power dynamic? And the thing is that maybe that makes it not a trope anymore if you change it enough, since tropes are about expectations. But I think that's kind of the point, right? Is that we need to build new expectations, build more insight and more windows into what a trope might look like through a different lens, right? And so exploring a singular trope through that sort of that shift in power, I think that's a really good way to start.
Awesome. Okay. Our next question is, why is it important for us to decolonize tropes? Right. So why is it important? RJ, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, it is supremely important because the stories that have already been told would be the only ones that are ever allowed, right? So if we're gonna like continue to tell stories, and I think really specifically about the horror genre is part of the reason why I do this on an academic stage as well as creative stage, is that you don't want the genre to go away. You don't want it to become as such that it cannibalizes itself and then it sort of just eats itself until it disappears. As a reader, I want something different. I don't want the same story wrapped up in the same types of wrappers told by the same kind of writers. I understand that we have tropes and genre expectations, and I have no problem with those. But if we're only allowed to express them in one way, then that's never going to be good. And so I want to see, horror stories through the lens of something that's non-Western culture. I want to see horror stories that are told by, queer creators. I want to see horror stories that are, informed by disabled people's experiences, right? So I want to see these things because otherwise we're going to run out of stuff to publish. If that's all that's being published, it's going to just go away. And as a reader, I don't really like that very much. So it's important for us to open up these borders, so to speak. I mean, it's not, and it's not just being inclusive. I mean, it is literally allowing the stories to exist with different points of power, with different levels of agency, because we've not seen that in very, very big numbers. Like you'd have some people believe that, oh my gosh, BIPOC are taking over everything. And it's just really hard for, white men to get stories sold. And I'm thinking, bro, no, like I'm a reader and no, there's no shortage. I promise there's no shortage.
Right. Adiba?
I don't even know how to follow that. That was a really good answer. I guess, looking at it a little closely in terms of the romance and young adult category, because that's mainly what I write. I think when we're looking at romance, one of the main things we always have to decolonize is desirability, because romance is so much about who gets to be desired, how they get to be desired, how they desire other people. And so if what we're mainly seeing in romance books, and specifically young adult romance books, are white people and cis heterosexual people, we are specifically telling kids, the only people who get to be desired are these people, and not you if you're queer, not you if you're brown or black, or if you're trans. So that's kind of one of the reasons why we need to specifically decolonize romance and young adult romance, because so many young adults or teens are reading these books, picking these up, and expecting that this should reflect their lives in a certain way, that when they see these romances, it should be someone that they can desire or someone that they can relate to. And a lot of the time that's not there, unfortunately. And so what they learn and what they have to unlearn then deep into adulthood is their own desirability, not just in terms of who they can desire, but in if they deserve to be desired as well.
Yes.
That's a great point. Right? Keir?
Absolutely agree. And I'm not sure what to follow that with. Like it's that's exactly what I would like to say. I think what I can do to add to this conversation maybe is to give a really good example of how of why decolonizing tropes is important for like the future, the echoes, because exactly what you're describing there, Adiba, all right, hold on, too many thoughts now because we've had all these good answers. Let me rewind. So some time ago, I read a manuscript written by a person of color where everyone except two people were coded as people of color, right? And the two people who were coded white were consistently described as hot in one way or another. Yeah, and they were the only two people in that book that were described as desirable in that way. And for me, that is a perfect example of why we need to decolonize these tropes, because it's going to lead to a cycle whereby even other writers of color are putting these tropes in where they're only viewing a certain type of person as desirable. And I don't want to live in that world. Like, no offense to anyone who does, I guess. No, I'm kidding. Total offense to anyone who does. But I'm gonna sit here and lie to you all. Sorry. I lied earlier. It's just not happening. But that's not a world I want to live in. And if we keep writing those same tropes, using those same lenses, using that centricism of cishet whites able-bodied, right? We're only going to get those things over and over. And I don't know that I'm quite as pessimistic as Rhonda in that we'll not publish anything. What it does mean is that we're just not going to publish things that people like us want to read.
Yes.
Which, I mean, honestly, yeah, might as well be the same thing, right? And that is why I think it's so important to decolonize tropes like this, because, and if you watch the Joyous Resistance panel, we talk more about like these echo chambers and how fighting against this established system that, you know, creates a monolith of individuals, you know, or of groups rather, it's not good. You know, it's not good.
Lauren?
Yeah, I'm like, I feel like following up these three. I'm like, I have no idea what to add here. I feel like everybody's taken everything. I think maybe one perspective I can approach this with, well, I guess maybe two. It's been a couple months now, I guess, since I've been doing acquisitions for Catstone, but like our press specifically only focuses on marginalized voices. So everybody that we publish is from a diverse background. So we're publishing speculative fiction, mostly adult, but some YA and new adult. And so that's been an interesting process, I think, seeing it from that back end with only looking at specific voices. And the interesting thing is we still will get submissions and queries from non-marginalized or diverse voices. So it is one of the things where even as much as we're pushing for diversity or pushing for decolonization in some way, there are always going to be people who continue to think that all spaces are for them. And so that is maybe one other perspective I can add. And then another, as an anthologist, I've been editing multiple anthologies, and actually, RJ, what you were talking a little bit about is like BIPOC voices in Gothic or regular horror. And so I just published an anthology with that. And all of my anthologies that I publish really have a push for diversity, like across the board. And so that's been an interesting process, because also too, there's sort of a difference when you're writing just a book by yourself, or, you know, coming up with something for only one person versus, you know, 15 to 25 different voices and collating it all together. So that's been an interesting thing to me, to see how multiple people decolonize tropes within their own writing, like even short stories, and a lot of them are retellings, or I'm working on a fairy tale anthology as well. And so seeing how some of these tropes are decolonized by people of color has been one of the most interesting things for me. So like there are those of us out there actively working in these spheres and decolonizing the tropes as much as we can, but it's like everybody else needs to come with us, like get with the program. Exactly, like everybody else needs to start working on the decolonization here.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. Everything we often hear in these discussions, it's very related to YA and adult. I write middle grade, so it's in a weird position where it's like, how much of these issues do I incorporate into it, and how much description? So while I personally love reading romance, I'm not going to put that in to it. So the notions of what is and isn't desirable, I try not to, because it's like they're 10, 11, 12-year-olds. They're not supposed to be thinking of it, but they do in fact think of it. So it's interesting that you want to create a place and safe space for them that says you can have these things and you can be in these situations. You know, it's not just blonde-haired, blue-eyed heroes and heroines all the time. So that's definitely important for it. Our next question is that, what are examples of fictions that use decolonized tropes that you guys can think of? What fictions have you read that's out there that we can look to for examples of decolonizing tropes that is well done or acceptable, right? Keir, I'm going to start with you.
Every time it's one of these questions. So I'm going to apologize deeply for any mispronunciation, but what comes to mind first when I think of really good examples of decolonized tropes is Nnedi Okorafor's African Futurism, and all of her books that engage with African futurism. And I'm being very specific to say African futurism and not Afrofuturism, because she's talked ad nauseum about the two and the difference. And I recall also nothing. I don't recall a specific book. Maybe the Marrow Thieves, but even that, I'm not sure if other people would consider that a decolonized trope, because it does deal very much with themes of colonization. But Strange Horizons, if I recall correctly, had a really good article some time ago about indigenous futurisms as well. So I really think any futurism that's not, European is probably a good place to start for decolonized tropes.
RJ?
Well, so this is going to sound terrible. So I haven't had a chance to read a lot of book length fiction lately because I've been neglecting my own writing. But in teaching, one of the poems that I use a lot for my literary analyses for students is We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. And one of the reasons I love using this poem is because the meaning of wearing masks and a dual consciousness, if you will, becomes really different when you are from a marginalized group of people, right? So you don't necessarily wear a mask just because you want to. You wear a mask for survival. And so whereas if you're from a dominant group that's used to having power, it's a choice. You can fluidly move in and out of, consciousness and existences that if you want to, but you're not forced to do that. But marginalized people are required to do this. And so there is always a foot in different worlds. And this poem so very clearly shows that. And I love when my students discover this poem for the first time and they're like, oh my gosh, it was written, over 100 years ago. I mean, anything past 10 years to them is historical anyway, right? And so they're like, people were dealing with this back then. And you think, yeah, and still, yeah. But it gives them a really good sense of understanding that the ways that they survive, the ways that they protect themselves, the way that they move around in society and in space are ways that have been utilized, for hundreds of years. It also gives them a different perspective about what it was like to be so closely related to slavery. Right? To understand that even then, regardless to what you're taught in your history books, when you're told that enslaved people were smiling and grinning and grateful and happy, you kind of start to understand, yeah, no, I don't think so. There might have been a different story here. And so I would have to point to that as definitely decolonizing the whole idea of just talking about how you exist.
Adiba?
So speaking specifically about young adult romance, again, since that is the space that I'm most familiar with, it's actually kind of sad because I think one of the tropes, I guess, that shows up in young adult romance or the young adult space in general is this idea of the main character and then a love interest who is usually, if it's a white person writing it, the main character is white and then the love interest is a person of color, or if it's a person of color writing it, it's often the opposite way. So I think one of the important ways that certain writers specifically decolonize that, and it's a very simple thing that they do, is actually have casts which heavily feature people of color, actually have love interests and main characters who heavily feature people of color. And unfortunately, it's very, very rare to see that. So, some authors that I think are doing a great job in that space are Joya Goffney, the Dimpleverse series by Cynthia Menon, and Christina Forrest. She's also always writing Black characters in love, which I think is amazing. But then going into specifics a little bit more of what I was talking about, desirability, I think one of the books that does this in a fantastic way is TJ Pawar Has Something to Prove by Jasmine Cordeo, which is coming out next month. And it's specifically about a girl who is Sikh and South Asian. And she decides to grow her body hair to see how, people respond to this. And so specifically speaking to this experience that a lot of women of color specifically have, where, we have more body hair, usually our body hair looks different, and we have a different experience with body hair and a different relationship to it. So specifically exploring what that looks like, but also how it affects our relationships, our friendships, our romances, and how it affects how we see ourselves. So I think, that's a book that I would always recommend. I think it does a brilliant job of decolonizing all of that.
Just I know that it's not my turn, I'm sorry.
No.
I just wanna emphasize, because I think that when this airs in June, TJ Powell will be out. So absolutely read that and absolutely agree with it also. Like I'm pretty sure I cried when I read that book. Sorry.
Lauren?
Okay, I'm definitely gonna have to check out that book, and I will be ready to cry now. I will be prepared. So a few examples that I thought of, and I know I was talking a little bit earlier, I've been in this big fairy tale retelling sphere because I'm working on an anthology for it. But in doing the research, I was reading Dark and Deepest Red by Anne-Marie McLemore, and then Cinderella is Dead by Caitlyn Barron. And both of those are absolutely fantastic. And I think both do a very good job of acknowledging a lot of fairy tale tropes, waiting for Prince Charming and, mistaken identities and ideas of soulmates, but also flipping it on its head. Like one of the example, actually both of them have a lot of queer representation on the page, a lot of people of color rep on the page. And so I think those are two examples that I can think of off the top of my head in YA spaces that are actively decolonizing the tropes within the pages and very much acknowledging historically maybe where some of the tropes come from, but also subverting them in the same time. So I think those are two examples that I think were really well done.
Awesome. Now, Adiba, I'm going to start with you on this one. What should writers be aware of as they utilize tropes?
I think the most important thing, and I guess this is going back to what we're talking about before, is to be aware of how tropes have been used historically, because I think that's always going to inform what readers expect, and it's going to inform how you are able to subvert something. So I think before you sit down to write a book or a short story, or even honestly to read one that utilizes specific tropes, it's important to just think about not just in literature, but in all of media, because I do think in different media, we see different ways that tropes are utilized. So sitting down and kind of researching how it has historically been used. And we can think about, how specific tropes have been used to hurt specific marginalized identities. So, a very common trope is the bury your gays trope, which thankfully a lot of us in the literature space are currently, trying to undo to not have that trope there anymore, but we still see it very, very often in TV, in movies. So I think doing that research, understanding historically how these tropes have been used, and then figuring out how to approach subverting these tropes, because unless you know something deeply, you can't successfully subvert it.
Lauren?
Yeah, I think for me, it sort of boils down to how tropes can further diverse representation. I feel like we're all kind of circling around the topic over and over, but as we've said, and as you just said, historically they've been present. We are acknowledging that they've been present, but how can we further diversify them? So how can we use them to our advantage? How can we write the tropes in a different way? I think there's a lot to think about, but I think just being aware as you're entering writing, and of course there's going to be things that you may not be aware of, and I think that that's just sort of the process of writing, but also being sort of willing to learn and listen to other people. right? Especially if somebody is like, hey, this may be a harmful trope that you're utilizing, and for you, you may not have even thought about it, or it might not have been on your radar, or maybe you didn't even think it was a trope, right? You didn't even acknowledge that it was something that's historically been used as a trope. So I think just being aware and knowing that decolonization is like definitely a learning process, even for writers of color. It's something that we're consistently going through because obviously, like, historically, we've been raised a certain way in society. And so even if we think we haven't, they're ingrained in us to, I think Adiba's been talking a lot about it, like even just how we view desirability, like that's definitely something to think about. Being cognizant.
Here.
Yes. Yes to all of the above. I think to add to some of the sorts of questions you should ask yourselves and things you need to be aware of. Yes, where did the trope come from? And how is it present in other works? But also, what do your readers get from this trope? How is this trope serving the story? And in this context, how is it harmful? Assuming, of course, that it is. Also ask yourself whether or not this is a trope or a stereotype, right? Stereotypes tend to be very generic and oversimplified, is usually how we define a stereotype, whereas the trope is much more about the expectation of what this person is supposed to be, or what this event is supposed to be, or how it's supposed to go. But you should ask yourself which one of those you're dealing with, and what is the backstory of it, so how is it actually serving your story and your readers? And then consider how you're choosing to convey the messages that convey whatever this trope is, right? How are you choosing your language for this? Yeah. And you would think that that is something silly to tell writers, yeah? But I think it's actually really, really important, because the people who really need to hear it and are the people who don't know, right? Obviously, it's the people who need to pay the closest attention to their words are often not the people who realize that they need to pay such close attention to their words. And so that is something that I would definitely encourage all writers to be mindful of. Yeah, is that when you're talking about a person of color, are you using words where the connotations are negative, or, and I don't just mean that in the the lens of beauty, but also like in the lens of fair, or disrespect, or respect. What's the power dynamic, right? Keep coming back to that, and what is the lens you're using?
Nice. RJ?
Yeah, so Keir makes an excellent point in delineating the differences between stereotypes and tropes. I think that as a writer, I try really hard to write with intent. So that nothing ever just happens. So that doesn't necessarily mean plotting out every point, but that means being very, very mindful of what I am writing about, what I am writing to. And so, and as a part of my academic work, I look at a lot of movies, and I think about how some movies actually subvert these stereotypes or subvert these ideas. So for instance, the movie Us by Jordan Peele doesn't get nearly as much acclaim as I think it should, but I think it was utterly brilliant. In one of my focuses is in motherhood and monstrous motherhood, what we consider monstrous. And I thought it was just brilliant the way that movie uses Black women who are not mammies. So usually you think about Black women, you expect Black women to want to be moms. They want to mother everyone's kids. They want to have a whole bunch of kids of their own. The reality is every Black woman doesn't want to have kids. Some Black women don't even like kids, right? And so I thought that it was really masterful how it gave these differing ideas of Black motherhood. You have the one Black mother who loves her children, wants them, but she's literally a clone. And so she should be monstrous, but this monster is capable of loving her children and the children of the other woman, right? But then the human woman did not want to be a mother. Motherhood was forced upon her. She didn't really like her children, right? She called them monsters, and she's like, yeah, okay, whatever. She kind of grudgingly took care of them. But doing this and subverting that mammy trope is taking something that's usually harmful for Black women and showing a different experience. And so this is what writers should aim to do, is to not fall into those harmful stereotypes and tropes. But if you're going to use them, subvert them or use them with intent so that the audience knows that you are turning it on its head, or that you are poking fun at it, that it is a parody as opposed to something that should be upheld. So I think that's really important.
Lauren, I'm going to start with you on this question. How can writers practice decolonizing tropes?
I feel like I'm kind of slightly going to just repeat myself here, because I feel like every time I'm like, just think about it. For me, like really critically thinking about it when you come across the trope, like, and how you're using it in your book. And one of the things that I was thinking about, I know that over the last couple of years, especially in romance spaces, there's been a lot of like critical work done about like power imbalances. Like, you know, obviously like a lot of the tropes have related with certain pairings, like, you know, student teacher pairings or like boss worker pairings. And there's been like a whole movement of like contextualizing these and thinking about it. And so I feel like pushing past that and looking at maybe decolonizing other tropes beyond some things with power imbalances, right? And looking at some of those that are like present and representative of like real world issues. Like, I know fiction is obviously, you know, it's not real world, but the ramifications are there. And I think that you can have harmful tropes utilized in fiction all the time. So, you know, moving beyond even to just like race, like I know we've all talked a little bit about that, but other marginalized communities, like is somebody able or disabled? Are we just falling back on these tropes that are inherently either pairs or groups of, you know, like white, cis, straight, able-bodied people? And like, how does that work, especially if we're all working in other genres? I mean, I know there's differences for like contemporary literary fiction writers, but I think most of us are working in genre fiction in some way or the other. And so I think there's, you know, a different set of tropes that we utilize that maybe literary fiction writers don't utilize it as much. But yeah, think about it.
Awesome. Keir, how can we practice decolonizing tropes?
Gosh, I think the first thing to do, in addition to everything that Lauren has already said, of course, read widely.
Yes.
I mean, it's another thing that I think a lot of people take for granted, but because tropes come from our set of expectations, read things that don't meet your expectations, read outside of your comfort zone, read outside of what you know, because it's only in doing that are you going to gather information on what is different and how other people have done it and how other people have broken these tropes and subverted them and done all of these other things. So read widely. And of course, maybe what you want to do doesn't exist out there yet. And that's okay, because you're there to write that story, right? And so the only other piece of advice I have for you, if you want to do that, or maybe when you want to do that, if you're, you know, watching this, it's a probably when, right? Lean into it. Don't toe the line.
Mm-hmm.
Don't toe the line. Go for it. If you're going for it, commit.
Yeah. Okay. So, Adiba?
Again, so many good answers. It's difficult to follow these up. I guess, you know, I second everything everyone said, but to add on to it, one of the things that I think it's really important to do is to have conversations with people, because I think a lot of times as writers, we kind of see ourselves as like solitary beings. And it's like, I'm sitting down at my laptop and I'm writing my novel or writing my short story, whatever. But I think for us to really be able to decolonize anything, not just tropes, we need to recognize that we are part of a wider community and that we do have responsibilities to these communities. And that means being able to have conversations with other people from this community. So, you know, one of the things that I like to do when I am planning my novels or brainstorming my novels, or when I'm having an issue with it, and I'm really wondering, like, is this actually decolonizing something, or am I actually writing towards something harmful? Is I will call up a friend and I will say, hey, this is an issue that I'm having. Can we please just talk things through? And sometimes it's not even that my friend has an answer, it's that having that conversation and hearing a different perspective, or even having my perspective echoed back at me, might make me think about it in a different way. So yeah, I just think having conversations with people who are from different backgrounds, with your friends, people in the wider community, I think it's really important. And honestly, there's nothing that can really replace it, in my opinion.
RJ?
Yeah, absolutely. All of these things. In order to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. Like you have to be. You have to read widely, as Keir said, especially in the genre that you're trying to write. Personally, I think that you should read everything. That's just me. But if you're not going to read everything, at least read what you're trying to write, and then analyze it. That's a thing that I think should go under research. And I'm not sure. I know that I'm always pushing though. I mean, I am the English professor. Yes, analyze is like a part of my DNA at this point, but I promise it's helpful for people outside of academia, right? Like even in creative writing, I teach my students, analyze what you're looking at. Think about if your story will change if the people were different. So if you're reading a story, if you can put in, let's say, a Black woman from a certain generation, would that story look the same or would it be different? A lot of times that story would be totally different. And that lets you know that there's lots of space to play in if you're going to decolonize this story. And if you're starting to read stories that all kind of look the same, it's probably because they're from the same viewpoint. And so you want to shift that viewpoint. Think about what this would look like for a character from a different group. Put yourself into the story. If you're not reflected into it, look at it that way. That works for me because I'm a bit older. And so the works that I grew up reading, I'm very easily able to say, yeah, there's no Black people there anyway. So if I were there, what would have happened? What would I think about this? So I think that analyzing what's there, analyzing what it is that you're trying to do, and then think about your ultimate goal. Like as a writer, your ultimate goal probably shouldn't just be, I just want to make money doing whatever's the easiest thing. And I'm not knocking that. I mean, hey, go get your bag, right? But at the same time, if you're aiming for something a little bit bigger, you should be aiming for something that tells an authentic story, that isn't the same as every single thing else in every single detail too. So you should analyze these things, study, analyze, and aim for something that's told through a different lens.
And it's more like when you think of the notion of decolonizing the tropes, it's not just replacing that same storyline with a different character. You don't want to fall into the same traps. And it's just like, okay, well, now it's not a white male that's doing it. Now it's an Asian woman or whatever. Like, yes. You have to kind of analyze it. So it's like, we're not just replacing it with a different face. You want to break through whatever those barriers are as writing, right? Practice how you can do that.
Exactly. I mean, it becomes different. If you change the characters out, it should become different.
It should become
Nothing should be the same if those are dynamic characters and with nuance. This shouldn't be the same.
Awesome. Well, RJ, I'm going to start with you on this one. So do you feel that it is potentially dangerous to not decolonize tropes?
Oh, absolutely. Just absolutely. So I'm going to put on my mom hat here. I'm like, I don't want my kids to live in a world where they think there's only one set of people in existence, right? That only one kind of people can have love, that only one kind of people are smart. And so this is a really big one in my house. It's like, Black people can be smart too, like that. We can have multiple degrees too. We can do that. So it's just really important, because if we don't break these things down now, we have a whole generations of people coming behind us. I mean, I have students who they already hate English, right? They already hate writing classes. They take them because they have to, most of them, right? But when I'm able to offer them different viewpoints and different parts, they come out of the class thinking, oh, so you mean to tell me that queer people can write poetry? Absolutely, right? You think about, oh my gosh, so you mean to tell me that disabled people can star in movies and they can be horror movies and they can like try to get away from people? Yes, 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 this can be done. So I mean, we owe it to ourselves, because just because I'm old, I still want to be more comfortable, right? I'm more comfortable in a world where everybody gets to speak, where everybody gets the stage at some point. So we owe it to ourselves and these other generations to break down these notions, because honestly, this is a, regardless to how ethnocentric our country is here, like I'm speaking in, I'm from Texas, first of all, but also the United States, there are other people in the world. And so it really is just helpful for us to expand our thinking and to be as global as our world really is.
Awesome. Definitely. Right. Lauren, what do you think?
Yes, I agree. I do think it is dangerous. And I feel like it's dangerous, but I also just feel like, I don't want to say lazy. I feel like that's not the right word, but like enough effort. Like I feel like we need to put like effort into doing it. And decolonizing some of the tropes, because like RJ was saying, like we live in a world where like things happen all the time, and rights are consistently being targeted and or taken away from us or stripped, or certain groups are even more marginalized or seemingly reverting to other historically marginalized the way that we were. So I think like we have a duty to be decolonizing these tropes actively, and be looking at the representation on the page that we're writing or reading, or discussing in a classroom setting, or wherever you're at in the conversation. Like I think it's something that we need to be doing, like bare minimum representation. I feel like some of the time, I feel like is what I want to tell some of my writing peers. Like it shouldn't be that difficult to have like a couple of diverse experiences in a book. Like even if you're writing a sci-fi space epic or historical romance, like there's the possibility of adding in people who don't just look the same or act or talk or speak the same way. It's really important. So yes, I think it is dangerous and feeds into a very specific narrative.
Adiba?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's already given such great answers. I definitely think it's dangerous to not decolonize tropes. And I think if we look at, like, I guess the history of storytelling, I think culturally, every culture has a history with storytelling. But unfortunately, because of colonization, most of our storytelling cultures have been wiped out to some extent. Most of our stories have not existed past violent and brutal colonization, genocide, wars, etc. So what that means is the tropes that have existed and the stories that have existed have specifically come from a place of colonization, a place of violence, a place of brutality. So right now, what our kids are seeing are these stories, which are not their stories historically. And so I think a lot of the times when we are writing our stories, we're not just writing to decolonize, and we're not just writing to, write a more diverse perspective, but we're also undoing the harm that's been done to us and the harm that's been done to our stories, our cultures. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think it's really dangerous to not be able to do that, because right now we're still writing from a lack, and, we need to get to a place where we're writing from a place of abundance, and it's going to take a long time to get there. So we need to keep doing that.
Keir?
Yes. Yes to all of the above. Yes to what everyone has said. And also, yes, I think it is deeply dangerous to decide not to, or to choose not to decolonize tropes, not just individually, but as a community of writers, as an industry in publishing. I think Adiba kind of hit where what I was feeling too, in that if we don't do it, we will lose. We will lose culture and stories and history, and we've already lost so much. We've already lost so much of it. Yeah, not just culturally, but from different different ethnic groups and cultural groups and racial groups and all of those things due to colonization, but perspectives, right? Right now, we're not hearing neurodivergent perspectives and disabled perspectives, and we're not engaging with discussions around mental health, and we're not engaging around other other things that we have systemic problems with in the ways we could be, because we aren't challenging those tropes which are part of this larger system in the ways that we could be. And I don't get me wrong, I mean, I think it's happening. It's not that the challenge doesn't exist. Obviously, we're challenging it. Here we are, right? But to not do that means that nobody's challenging it, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, because even in terms of the dangerousness, the notion of oral storytelling, or the structures, the narrative structures that we're used to reading, right? Everybody wants a 3-act book. You need the beginning, the middle, the end. It has to follow this arc, but there are so many different structures that it feels like if you use an alternative structure coming from an Eastern perspective, Southeastern perspective, let's use a 4-act. Let's try to look at different narrative structures that aren't very Western and colonial in their making, that in and of itself might be a way to show a different way of reading and seeing those stories, because our lives don't operate in a straight line, and we have those peaks and valleys. So definitely agreeing with everybody saying it is dangerous, right? Keir, I'm going to start with you on this next question. How hard is it to break through commonly accepted tropes?
So I'm gonna try to answer this question in 2 directions. One is, how hard is it to break through a trope as a writer in your work? I think that it's difficult because it takes a lot of unlearning, right? And I feel like there are definitely other people here who will answer that as writers much better than I can. So I'm gonna leave it at that. But from a publishing industry perspective, to publish a book where you've broken these tropes, that is hard. That is very, very hard to do in today's climate. I think it is getting better. I think that opportunities and open-minded people and non-white cishet able people are slowly entering publishing and trying to make a difference and trying to recognize voices that are outside of the dominant sociocultural and other group that we're experiencing or that we're living under. I don't know the best way to phrase that, but it's hard. Like we're not yet at the point where you can write that crazy super duper ultimately leaning into wow, here I go being very ADHD again and not finishing my sentences. I'm so sorry, everyone. Hit me up in the Discord, maybe I'll finish a sentence. But Adiba had mentioned some time ago this sort of consistent thing where we do have people of color in romance, but they are often paired with a white love interest, whether they're the main character or not. And part of the reason, I believe, and this is only my opinion, right? So don't attribute this to anyone else. I don't have research to support this. I believe, though, that it's because that white love interest instead of another person of color tends to make it more palatable for the people we need to sell this book to get it, onto shelves in a bookstore. And that sort of gatekeeping, that sort of hurdle exists everywhere for all of the different tropes that we're trying to decolonize. And that makes it very difficult. I think that it is changing. And I certainly intend to work very hard to change it, as well as many, many other agents and editors out there. But it will take time because publishing is a slow industry. It's very slow.
Lauren?
Yeah, I think just echoing what Keir's saying, like it's hard. I could speak a little bit to the writer perspective, not as much to the editor, only because I just started at Capstone. So I haven't really been working there for too long, so I feel like I don't have the ability to really discuss sort of like taking something out on submission or going in sort of the publishing aspect yet. But maybe next year I might have something more to say about that. But in terms of the writing, I think I touched a little bit on this earlier in the panel, but I think, you know, it's, as you said, like an unlearning process. Like, I think when you start off writing, you have, at least I can speak to myself, like when I started off in my undergraduate writing classes, you know, I was looking at like Ernest Hemingway and you know, Jane Austen, and only sort of like the classic writers as models in classes. So you're looking at tropes that have historically been used by successful white authors. And even if I was reading like amazing YA stories, that wasn't necessarily what I thought I was supposed to be writing. So I think even if you go through sort of a formulaic way of approaching writing, it takes a while to start to unlearn some of the tropes that you maybe don't even realize you've been writing or been utilizing. So I know for me, like I've been actively working at unlearning some of these for a good couple of years now, and there's still like a lot more unlearning to do. And I think, you know, as I said earlier, but just like being, you know, a little bit of, you know, understanding for yourself as a writer that you're not going to recognize certain tropes, or you're not going to see that something maybe is super harmful right away. Like you need to sort of go back through your work definitely with a fine-tooth comb, and also being open to feedback you get from, you know, any sort of critique partner or beta reader, or you're working with an agent or editor or whatever, and being aware that other people are going to spot blind spots that maybe you didn't even notice were in your writing, and just, you know, being aware of that. And also, you know, taking advice. Definitely, I would say take advice from other people in the industry. We're all in this process together, especially for those of us from marginalized communities.
Adiba?
Yeah, I guess I can speak about this through three different perspectives. So the first, as a writer, as you know, Lauren said, it is incredibly difficult. I think, especially when you get into specificities, especially like specificities of culture. So for example, you know, I am from Bangladesh, so often I'm trying to write a Bangladeshi perspective, or more specifically, Bangladeshi perspective in the Irish diaspora, because, you know, I live in Ireland and I'm Irish. But that means that when I started writing my books, there were no blueprints for me to follow. What could a story like this look like? And then, you know, to further complicate it, I am Muslim and I'm writing Sapphic characters. So there was honestly just nothing. And, you know, even speaking of markets, how do I show publishers that there is a market for a book like this, for these marginalizations? So it was very difficult to actually just sit down and be able to write my books and kind of try to be unapologetic in how I wrote them, unapologetic in how I represented my culture, my religion, you know, the place where I live, and all of those things. And so one of the things that I actually experienced was when I wrote my first, second, third draft, and I started querying an agent, I was using Hindi words for a lot of things instead of Bengali, because I know that's what, you know, white people would understand, because Hindi is a little bit more acceptable than Bengali. And then, you know, I signed with my agent and I changed all the Hindi words to Bengali to see if he would say anything. And he didn't say anything, which was great. And then, you know, I got a deal with the publisher, and then I made a few more changes. I changed more foods into Bengali foods. And I was waiting for somebody to say, stop doing that, you know, change it back. And nobody said that. And, you know, that's how the book got published. And so the more into the industry I get, the more comfortable I feel being more unapologetic in who I am and what I'm writing. But that's because I've had to set up that blueprint. And hopefully it means that other people who are also writing from these perspectives can hopefully, you know, see my books and they can have it a little bit easier. So yes, from a writer perspective, it can be very, very difficult. From the perspective of going into publishing, and specifically traditional publishing, it's honestly even more difficult, because even, you know, as I am, you know, kind of an established writer. I have a couple of books under my belt. I still face a lot of rejection. I still see a lot of racism from the publishing industry. And if I try to kind of diverge from the stories that I'm trying to tell and do something a little bit different, that's often when I also get like a lot of pushback. So it can still be quite difficult in terms of publishing and just trying to get something through the door. I think that's the most difficult thing. And then I guess speaking as somebody who has published and has seen how readers react to decolonized tropes, that can also be a really, really difficult thing, because often you can decolonize tropes. You can take a very common trope and you can put a different spin on it, but that doesn't mean that readers see it as a decolonized trope. A lot of the time it means readers see it as not that trope at all. They see it as something completely different, and they call you out for saying, this is this trope, because to them, it's not that trope. So then a lot of the times, you've gone through all these hurdles, you've written the book, you've published it, but you still have that last final hurdle to face where you almost have to defend what you've done. And you have to say, no, this is that trope. It just looks quite different when, there's people of color at the center, when there's queer people at the center. So all in all, yes, it is difficult, but I do think it's worth it and it's important to do the work.
RJ?
Yeah, oh, for sure. I've only recently started telling people this, but I had my first paid writing piece at 17, right? And I am now 50. And so I've been writing for 33 years. I am just now gaining a lot of traction. Like just now, and I'm meaning like the past couple, 2-3 years maybe, where some people think I'm brand new, and I'm like, yeah, no. And so the writing of the decolonizing of tropes in the writing itself has not been difficult, because what Adiba talks about is exactly my experience. I never set out to do anything except to write about Black women and Black women's experiences. Now, of course, not as a monolith, because some of these women, I've not even experienced what they've experienced, but they are the way that the characters came to me in my stories. And I mean, countless rejection after rejection. And, well, they're too Black or they're not Black. I don't resonate. This character doesn't resonate with me, or this motivation isn't realistic. I mean, I probably have heard all of it. I've even gone through an MFA program, and I'm like, okay, surely this expensive degree, that's got to be the key. But I insisted on still writing about Black women through the lens of Black women's experiences. So you still have the doors that are shut. I even see in academia, well, and I can't even say academia. So I have this, I have a nonfiction book that I'm kind of starting to shop around. And I keep getting things from agents that say, this is too academic, because I'm actually citing my sources, right? Because that's important. But then I say, well, it's pop culture, because of the titles that I have. They are homegirl language, it's AAVE, right? But then I'm being told, well, no, it's not. But it's not pop culture enough, right? And so still there's this idea that if you're writing about certain tropes in certain kinds of ways, or you are presenting information in certain kinds of ways, it has to be packaged a very particular way. And so, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm too old to not be unapologetic. I am who I am. My writing is what it is. I find that it does resonate with a lot of people, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but it can be hard. It can be hard. There were numerous times when I thought, if I just kind of whitewash these characters, I bet that would work. And then, of course, my heart is breaking, and I'm going, you know what? I don't want it that bad. If that's what I got to do, I just don't want it. So I'm good to be on the fringe. I'm totally okay with that. I think the fringe is where the biggest party is anyway. Yeah. So, okay. But it can be very, very difficult as a writer and as an educator. Because I don't want this work to be inaccessible to people. And that's another thing when you talk about decolonizing the tropes, decolonizing the work. There's no reason to have this high language in academia that is just inaccessible by everybody. And so, but I'm here to fight the good fight, and I'm going to do it until I just can't do it anymore. But it is hard.
Yeah. And if I can circle back to an earlier question too, on why it's important to decolonize tropes, this is a prime example. the reason that we have gatekeepers who are like, oh, this isn't Black enough, or this isn't Indian enough, or this isn't what this experience is supposed to sound like, or these words need to be Hindi and not Bengali, right? The reason we have those feelings and we have people in positions of power that tell us these things, that say this is what your experience is supposed to look like, is because these tropes exist and have not been decolonized. And so because of that, we are stuck in this very same loop. And that, I think that's the example for me. That's the top, that's the peak example of why we need to do this.
Right.
Yes.
Definitely. I mean, it's difficult to know that you're trying to break it down. But it feels like, oh, I could take the easy way out as a writer if I really want to be published. And so even for myself, when I hear it, the use of the Bengali words, I incorporate Thai into my book and into the story. And I really doubted and debated, do I want to do this? Do I want to include that? And people aren't going to know what it means. And then even as I write it, I had to learn it secondhand, even though that's like our language. But I want my kids to read it and I want them to incorporate it. So in terms of middle grade, having that diversity in there feels very important for the next generation to know it's important and that's part of you. So it's definitely key and critical, but it is hard. And then part of me feels like, oh, if these rejections are coming because I have that in there, right? So I'm adding my own self-doubt into it. But you still need to be unapologetic and just kind of push it through either way. So it's good to hear that you want to pave the road for others to make it easier. So on that note, right, our next question is, what would each of you like to see with the future of writing and tropes? So RJ, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Oh man, I think I already said this. It's kind of difficult to not just retread this same ground. I'm kind of like Lauren with the just think about it, right? Like I would just love to see everybody get the mic. Like, let's just pass the mic to everybody. I want all the horror, right? I want all the romance. I want all the sci-fi. Like, I want this from every possible perspective that hasn't traditionally been able to speak. I mean, I've been reading for a really long time. Like I've been reading for even longer than I've been writing. And so, I mean, I've read a lot and I want different things. I want new things. I want to see what other people have inside their heads. I want to see their experiences. I really, really want to see all these different modes of writing embrace like that true viewpoint of let's shift the power, let's change it, pass the mic. Give this person the mic, give that person the mic, give these people the mic, right? That's all I really want to see. I just want more stories that are different and are authentic stories.
Adiba?
Yeah, I definitely agree completely. And I guess something that I really want to see is a lot of genre fiction by and about people of color, because if you look at a lot of traditionally published things like horror, thrillers, we're still missing people of color like in these stories. And there is I think there is a reason for it, because we're not really allowed to have fun with our stories a lot of the times. Publishers want us to write these stories that are all about our identities and how we face racism and all of that. And obviously, there's place for those stories and they can be very important. But also, I think when we go into these genres like horror, like thrillers, a lot of the times, we get to kind of bend the rules and we get to just have fun with these tropes, with these characters, and we're often not allowed to do that. So that's really what I want to see. I want to see more of us in genre fiction. I believe right now there hasn't been like any South Asian stories, for example, in YA horror, very few in YA thrillers. And so I would really love to see people like break into that. I would love to see publishers accept that. And I would also love to see it not as just, because all the times when we see like horror by people of color, we also see like their retellings of things, which is amazing. I love retellings. Mm-hmm. But why can we not, have the same conventions as a white writer? Why can't we just write a story, a fun story? Why can't we write like, you know, like murder and monsters that are not related to our cultures, you know. So yeah, that's what I want to see. I just want to see a lot of genre fiction with people of color. I want to see us, you know, break through. I want to see us have fun with these tropes, like not just decolonizing them, but decolonizing them and having fun doing it.
Yes. Yes. Totally.
Lauren?
Yes, agreed. 100%, 100% agreed. I want to see all of the different tropes, and I'm actively like I have a trope anthology actually out on submission right now, which I should be talking too much about, but I do have one that I'm working on, and that's been really, really interesting because there are a lot of diverse authors in that story or in that anthology, and so it's been like really like it's just been exciting, like see somebody tackle like the share like only one bed trope, or like an enemies to lovers story, or like other tropes that, like Adiba was saying, aren't necessarily just specifically tied to social issues or sadness. I don't know how else to say it, but just like you know, our lived experiences all the time, and some of these that we don't necessarily just get to write just because like they're fun and we want to write them, and white authors throughout history have just been able to write whatever they want without having to worry about it. And so that's something for me. And I feel like, I mean, we could concentrate on just like one trope and have, you know, hundreds of different diverse authors assess that one trope, and every single story would be different just because like we're all different writers and people. And so I think that kind of, you know, when, you know, we here in publishing, like I've just started, but you know, we already have that book, or we already have that perspective, or we've already tackled that XYZ. And every single time I want to push back and be like, why can't we just do it again? Like, why can't we see another one? Like, what's stopping us from having 80,000 different, whatever, fill in this trope here? So that's the future, is just having an endless amount of all the tropes from all of the people all the time. my little publishing utopia.
Keir?
Oh my God, yes. Okay, what do I add to this? To expand on what Lauren is saying too, is that I think that, you know, publishing is so disingenuous so often, because we already have X book, or we already have a Y book, and yet we have 1 million, and I think I don't want to credit, you know, I don't want people to credit me with this thought, because I think it was actually Michael from a different panel that said this, but like there are 1 billion mysteries out there with like a white male detective doing his thing, right? There are so many of those. There are so many. Okay. Why can't we have so many stories about why, or from this one group, or from this demographic, or from this people of this background, and we can have it. The market exists for these books, and people will love it, and people will buy it, and people will probably buy it and think it's more interesting than the 1,000,001 books about this one white guy solving mysteries or whatever he's doing, you know. Thank you, Michael, for that example, if you ever see this. But and that's the thing, right? Like they'll publish multiple stories of this like one thing, but not of the other. And I can appreciate that there's a fear there, because it's different to what they've already done. It's different. They don't know if it's going to make money, and everybody needs to eat their food. So, you know, but we need to eat our food too, right? Please. So coming back to the actual question before I just rant for the rest of this session, what would you like to see with the future of writing and tropes? What I would like to see, what I would like to read personally, I want to see more. I love science fiction. Is YA contemporary as well, like TJ Power, in fact. I want to see more books like TJ Power, where I could see myself or the people I love reclaiming their own stories. And I would love to see more in science fiction and fantasy, alternate futures, right? What if we weren't colonized by a white European country? What if an African country did the colonizing? What if one of the Indian states did the colonizing? What if, China has in fact colonized quite a few places. What if they colonized more than that even? There are so many alternates that we could explore, and in doing so begin to decolonize the tropes that do exist in our world, where, especially in this part of the world, we're so white-centric, among other centric. And in addition to that sort of alternate, just sort of futures where things have actually changed. What does a future look like where we are truly equal? What does a future look like where we have truly divorced religion and the state? What do those futures truly look like? Both in a future of our own world and also in fictitious worlds, right? Like write me a whole new secondary world that's better than this.
Yes.
That's what I want. Excellent. Those are all great wishes that we have. So for the last question on the panel, as you guys can think of, are there any suggestions for additional resources or maybe references? I know we've named a lot of awesome books and examples and authors for writers to look to, but those who are trying to really broaden their notion of what it means to decolonize tropes, can you guys think of any other references that writers should look to as they go on this journey? So Lauren, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So I'm going to lean a little bit on more academic texts because I feel like I've talked a lot about other fiction. But I'd say like a really good spot to start would be Bell Hooks. She's written a lot about like decolonizing the mind, just in general, like beyond not just tropes, but like just decolonization in general. And then another activist, Yuri Kochiyama, who actually has a really good quote on decolonizing the mind, which I like wrote down just to bring to the panel. This is because you're young and have dreams and want to do something meaningful. That in itself makes you our future and our hope. Keep expanding your horizon, decolonize your mind, and cross borders, which I feel like just like sums it up on a nice little platter. Like here's what to actively be working for a little bit. So I'd say those are some good spots to start. But yeah, it's a big process, but there's lots of other people out there who have gone through the process before and are actively going through it as well.
Awesome. Adiba?
Yeah, I guess on the complete other side of that, the first place that I usually go to when when I want to explore a trope is actually tvtropes.org, because I think it just gives you a lot of very basic information of tropes, and it gives you places to further research, gives you examples of all the types of media that have used this trope. So I think it's a really, really good starting off point, and it's really accessible. It has like so many tropes, pretty much like anything you could want to find. So I definitely recommend starting off there and just branching from that and seeing what else you can find.
RJ?
Yeah, so I would suggest reading Audre Lorde, and I guess I am going to come from an academic standpoint here, but I mean, especially talking about when we talk about using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, and she's like, yeah, no, let's do something different. Also, Horror Noir by Dr. Robin Means Coleman talks a lot about the history of horror in the Black community. I think that's really, really important to understand that, Black people have a different relationship to horror. I think that anything by Toni Morrison is a must read. Dr. Kenitra Brooks, is an academic who focuses on Black women in horror, specifically Black conjured women. And I especially love Dr. Brooks's work because it has always been unapologetic, right? It's like, I'm talking about Black women and that's what I'm doing, and oh well. So I think that I would start there, because these principles can be applied from different avenues of decolonization.
Keir? Anything?
So my go-to would have also been sort of like a Google scholar and, you know, look up so Audrey Lauren. But so what I can add to that, and something that I have done personally in trying to decolonize my own writing, has been, and this is not possible for everyone, this is not accessible for everyone, but engage with your elders.
Oh, yes, yes.
Engage with your elders. Talk to your grandma, okay? You know what? Maybe it's not going to be a pleasant experience. Maybe you don't have a good relationship there. And you know what? That's okay. I'm sure you can find someone, you know, somebody's auntie that you can talk to. But engage with your elders in as much as that is possible for you and your family. And just to learn about perhaps what are things that a tangent, because that's clearly how my brain works, right? Something we had, so in my country, Trinidad and Tobago, we only recently, just like some years ago, abolished child marriage entirely. And for many, many years, we did have acts in our legislation that allowed for if you were within a certain religion, or if you practice a certain religion, you would be allowed to marry under certain circumstances at an age as young as, for some of them, like 12 or 13 years old. And we very, I mean, obviously, like anybody hears that and you're appalled, right? You're appalled. And I too, I was simply appalled, and I didn't stop to question why this was there, or why people, you know, I didn't stop to think about any of that until much later in the campaign to change all of this, when you know, you talk to the people who were married at 12 or 13 or 14, and when they describe the majority of what the practice looked like in real life, in practice, it wasn't the horror story that, you know, we were led to believe, right? It was there because at that time, when we were so disenfranchised, we needed some kind of security for our children, and this helped to create that. And our children at that time also were not like forced to sleep together or anything, no, right? Like ceremony was performed and then they went back home. And then they did not see each other again in a marital context until they were much older. And that was the story. That is what I heard from my elders when I actually said to myself, let me talk to them about what their experience was actually like. And don't get me wrong, I am glad that the act has changed. I'm glad that, you know, it is more difficult now for people to take advantage of those who are so young and so vulnerable, because that was the point, right? Is that it was being taken advantage of and people were being hurt. But when, you know, when it was initially desired for, or oh wow, I am not Englishing well today, Jesus. When it was initially something that people wanted to have, and it was there for security, and the practice wasn't, you know, the barbaric thing we expected it to be when you actually speak to your elders. And for me, that was decolonizing a trope here, right? That was me engaging in what the real history of that was like, and what the real experience was like for people who had actually participated in that so many years ago. So engage with your elders and really do your research on what that was actually like, whatever the trope is, you know, because we have learned, so oh my goodness, we have learned to see, okay, sorry, we have really learned to see things through that sort of white lens, because they said it was bad. We've decided it was bad, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Awesome. Great. Well, that was definitely, all of this has been such an amazing panel. So before we go off, I'm going to give everybody a moment. Tell us what it is you guys are working on now. Anything that you want to share that's coming up, any books being published, stories for us to look for. I'm going to start with Adiba. What do you have on?
Yeah, I have a couple of things coming up. In July of this year, the paperback of my debut, The Henna Wars, is finally going to come out. So, really accessible for people, paperbacks, especially teachers if they want to, teach it to their kids. And then December 13th of this year, I had my first YA historical coming out, which is called A Million to One, and it's a sapphic heist set on the Titanic. And then in 2023, I have my next young adult rom-com called Donut Fall in Love, and it's all about donuts, baking, and a sapphic romance at its heart.
Awesome. If they want to find you, what's a good way? Are you on Twitter, social media? What's a good way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so my website is adibajaigirdar.com. On Twitter, I'm at Adiba_J, and on Instagram, I'm at DIBS_J.
Perfect. Thank you. Lauren?
Yeah, so I just had a BIPOC Gothic horror anthology that released in May called When Other People Saw Us, They Saw the Dead through Haunt Publishing. And then I have 2 Latinx genre anthologies releasing in October, like end of October, so right in time for Halloween. So that'll be sci-fi, romance, and Gothic horror. So the YA version is called Where Monsters Lurk and Magic Hide, and the adult anthology of that is Places We Build in the Universe. And then I recently announced a locale anthology through Inked and Grey Press, and then an eco-horror anthology through Outland Entertainment. So those will be publishing mid to late 2023, and then a lot of other projects to be announced soon, sooner rather than later. You can find me on my website, lauren.davila.com, Lauren T. Davila I think that's the Instagram handle, and then at Lauren Gilmore 03 on Twitter.
Awesome.
Nice.
RJ?
So I have I have a short story in the recently just last week released horror anthology by Cemetery Gates Media, A Picnic in a Graveyard. And so I have a short story there. My first horror collection is being published in August. It's called Hell Hath No Sorrow Like a Woman Haunted, with the Seventh Terrace. And it is available for pre-order right now. So I'm just beyond excited about that. And then in November, I have a story in the Into the Forest Baba Yaga anthology by Black Spot Books. So that one's looking really fun. I can't wait to read everybody else's stories. Like, I'm that writer that doesn't read like the ones that they give us, right? I just look at my story because I want to see everybody's at the end, right? And so I am also the co-host of a podcast we're having so much fun with called Genre Black Academia, where we kind of break down different genre works, film, literature, pop culture through the Black experience lens, academia. And I'm also an instructor at the Speculative Fiction Academy. Like, I'm going to get that wrong. So that's really exciting. Like, people that want to learn more about spec fic writing should come on and check us out. And I'm always on Twitter, like always, even when you don't see me on Twitter, I'm there at R Jackson Joseph. So if you're looking for me, that's where you need to come to Twitter. I'll be there.
Awesome. Keir?
Well, also on Twitter, even when I'm not supposed to be, unfortunately. But you can definitely find me at Keir Alekseii just about everywhere. My query manager is querymanager.com/query/Keir Alekseii. Twitter is at Keir Alekseii. Facebook, Instagram, wherever I have an account where you can connect with me, it is probably at Keir Alekseii, as well as my website is querylexi.com. So you can connect with me on any of those things. Just find my name, you'll find me. And I'm open to queries, and I actually have a special referral link for writers who find me through WriteHive. And I believe it is going to be in the Discord somewhere, or you can ping me or check my profile and you should be able to find it. But yes, I'll also, I think by the time folks see this, I would have already done query critiques, but I will try to put it in that channel as well.
What do
I'll
you
also
looking
just like,
for? Sorry,
sorry,
what's
Here,
on
go
your
ahead.
wish list right now?
Oh, what is on my wish list right now? Come on, I feel like you've seen me talk about this stuff. You know what's on my wish list. You know what's on my wish list if you've watched this panel. The short of it is that I kind of like sapphic everything. Also, very interested in non-white power couples of any gender identity or orientation. I have a real soft spot for the sort of the found family tropes. So if you want to decolonize that in any way, shape, or form you want to try and send it to me, please do. And I think the most important thing is that I'm only open to queries from folks who identify as coming from marginalized or underrepresented backgrounds. So I'm pushing an agenda, all right? I am not quiet about it. But my manuscript wish list is also accessible both on the Azantian website and on my personal website, and it should be up on manuscriptwishlist.com soon as well.
Perfect. Lauren, was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was also just going to say that I am also open to queries from diverse authors. So all that information can be found on my website as well. And I feel like I'm the echo here. You probably know what I'm going to want to be looking for, but I also have an extensive manuscript wish list. The weirder, speculative, anything you can think of that probably hasn't found a home yet, send it my way.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
great. Well, look, I think you guys need to get ready for the weird and the wild to come into your inboxes. So.
I'm ready. I am. All right,
Awesome.
Let's go.
Well,
Let's go.
Thank you much. Thank you guys so much. This was a wonderful, wonderful panel. I hope everybody enjoys it. Check us and follow us on the Discord. We'll be there answering your questions. So thank you so much and
Bye.